Thank you, Asye. Well, welcome everyone to today's FBS Chat. Our special guest, Catherine. Welcome, Catherine. Thank you for joining us. And my two fantastic co-hosts, Gil and Steve. Gil from Ohio. Steve from somewhere up north, I believe.
Liverpool.
Liverpool. Hey. And Catherine, you're in Bath. Is that
I
right?
am indeed. Yes.
Wow. We are truly all over the
We're
globe.
global.
Brilliant. So yeah, thank you, Catherine, for joining us. I'm always interested in how our guests came across Solution Focus for the first time. So how did you first come across the approach, and I guess what difference it made to you?
Oh, it's funny because I've heard this question so many times. Obviously on all the FBS chats, and yet I find myself not quite knowing how to answer how far back the story goes. Let's see. Yeah, after my when my youngest went off to school, after primary, I thought, right, I really need to kind of do something about my career, and then to kick it back into action properly. And I was sort of trying to do this, trying to do that. Nothing was quite working. I was feeling really frustrated about it. And it got to the point where I decided that I was going to do something that I always told myself I would never do, and that was do a course to teach English as a foreign language.
Wow.
And I did this course, and I really hated it. And what I discovered afterwards was that teaching English as a foreign language is very paid and quite stressful, and I didn't like it. So I thought, okay, just cut all that. I need to stop. This isn't working. In a very solution-focused way, stopping what wasn't working, and then thinking, given that my career is just not restarting, what would I do instead? And I decided that I was going to do some stuff that really meant something to me, and I started volunteering. And the first place I joined to volunteer was the local Age UK Days Centre. And the second one was this wonderful charity based in Bath called Mentoring Plus. And they match volunteer mentors with young people who are at risk of kind of falling by the wayside, maybe kind of disengaging from schooling. And I went and trained at Mentoring Plus, and I mentored a young woman, a teenage girl, for a year. And towards the end of my time at Mentoring Plus, they said, "Oh, well, Catherine, would you like to come and do some staff training? We've got this woman, Tara Greene, coming in, doing this thing called Solution Focused." And I thought, oh, okay, that's great. And I went in, and it was just 3 hours of a morning in a group. So, Tara introduced it to us. And I mean, what can you say? I'm sure that you all know what that feels like. Well, maybe I should not say much because you were skeptical at the beginning. But for me, it was like immediate. Oh, my God. I found something so powerful, so positive. I have to do something with it.
What was that oh my God moment, Catherine? What was it in particular that stood out?
Well, I think it's interesting because having watched all the FBS chats, I've one of the things that I've been interested to sort of see is what there is in common. What do all these people have in common that makes them drawn to the solution focused approach? And I was thinking, who of all the people that have been on the chats, I would kind of like to be. And I thought it was John Hendon. I'd like to be John Hendon. And what I love about him is a combination of stuff. First of all, I love the fact that he is someone who's been through it. He's not just a survivor, he is a thriver. And now he is helping people who've been through what he's been through to find a better life. And I can identify with that really personal experience of coming through personal difficulty and really wanting to help other people, but wanting to do it in a way that empowers them. So I wanted, when I was having difficult times, I wanted to be empowered. So for me, this is about empowerment. And that is what I absolutely love about it, is that thing about empowering the individual.
This is me being nosy now, Catherine, and obviously you don't have to give us any details, but when you were going through what you were going through, if you'd have met a practitioner that was solution focused, what difference would that have made for you? Thinking back on it.
Absolutely massive. I mean, it's so this was back in kind of 2001 actually. I went through a point in my kind of personal life where I realized that I really needed to fundamentally change how I was relating with the world and the kind of assumptions that I was using in the way that I related with the world. And I basically had, what people call a nervous breakdown. And it's a very interesting experience having a nervous breakdown. Very interesting indeed. If you can come out the other side and look back at it and be able to say, okay, I came through that and I've learned from it. So what happened was I went to the doctor and I was put on antidepressants, and of course that is totally it's just it's a prop. It does nothing to deal with what's brought you to this point of needing medication. And then the next thing that I experienced was the offer of being able to have 6 free sessions of therapy with somebody at the surgery. And this was before IAPT. It was before CBT, that rollout of CBT. And I saw this woman and, a fully trained professional. And I came out of the first session feeling worse than when I went in. And for me, that thing where you start, when someone comes to you with something that is difficult for them, and you start to kind of such an unexpected angle of how you would like things to be, what it is that you can do, what do you hope for? To me, it's, transformational. And if I could have had, I'm sure, if I could have had one session of solution-focused therapy, that would have made a difference. What actually happened was I went in, I had this therapy from a trained professional, and I never went back. So what I did, because at the time we didn't really afford counselling, and I didn't really know how to find my way through all the different kinds that were being offered. So I went off and I kind of discovered Buddhism instead. That's what I did instead of therapy. And it was kind of great. It's really great. And then kind of later on, I found this, and I've been working to find a way of using this and to make a difference for other people.
Oh, brilliant. I'm curious to what your career, because you spoke about your career earlier on. What was your career before you came to Solution Focused?
Well, I have done lots of things in my life. And the one thing, so I started out, I did English at uni, which I loved. And then I trained as an actor, and I was an actor for a couple of years. And that's where I was doing Shakespeare. So, wow,
Ooh,
what an incredible
yeah.
experience, what an incredible opportunity. And at the end of 2 years, I kind of thought I was done. I was 28 and I settled down. I decided I didn't want to continue with acting, and I started to use my English training to be a writer. So I've also done kind of journalism and kind of what they call content marketing. And then the first thing I had tried when my youngest went off to school to sort of professionally was storytelling. And so telling traditional tales from around the world. And you might be starting to see a theme here, a professional theme, which is
Yeah.
words.
Yeah. Language.
Yeah. So when I think about, so that's led me to think about, sometimes I think, oh, well, what is this thing we're doing? What is it that might make someone a good solution-focused practitioner? And I think that ability to kind of find your way through, the conversation, the language that someone is using, and to be able to pick up all those threads where it's almost like, what is it? It's a bit like, do you remember those word puzzles that you used to see in kind of books, where you had to find the word?
Yeah.
It's
Word
a bit
search.
like that. Yeah, word search.
Word search. Yeah.
It's a bit like, it reminds me a little bit of that.
Mm.
So I do feel that kind of connection with language is a help in the work. So those are the other things that I've done, but I promise to stop now. And this is what I want to do, and this is what I'm doing. So thank you so
Steve.
much for your questions, Joe.
No problem.
I always admire the way that you ask them, and what I notice is that the person who's being asked the questions gets really, really immersed in the answer, and then they finish. And it's kind of like,
thank you, Catherine.
back to you, Joe.
Catherine, of all the people you could have complimented, you had
Excuse
to do
me,
that to Joe.
Asye. Excuse me. Get on with your admin.
Yeah.
I think the language that we use it's really really important. But I sometimes I go into sessions and I don't consciously think of the language I'm using. I don't know if it just comes, where you kind of feel that you have to adapt your language to the audience that you have in front of you sometimes. And sometimes I find myself using language that I would never use in other contexts. And it's almost like, how is this approach? Because I was looking at Eve's interview the other day, and one of
I
her
was
things,
looking at that. Yeah.
and one of her things was making a connection with a client. And
Mhm.
Gil, you were on that conversation as well, where she was saying that that relationship with your client tells you more about how successful something's going to be rather than the actual approach itself.
Well, that's supported by all the meta-analysis on therapy.
Yeah.
That show that identifies what really makes the difference are the common factors, and the therapeutic alliance is, the research shows, meta-analysis is the most potent ingredient, regardless of therapeutic approach. So Eve was ahead of her time on that.
Yeah. And I was just wondering, is the solution focused approach, because it is a co-construction, it is a collaboration. Is that where the beauty lies? Is that where the beauty is? Not so much in the approach itself, but how you build that connection with people. Because I've gone away from asking, so what are your best hopes? I want to know about you. What is it about you? What makes you special? What makes you, I don't know. What do you do for fun? I don't care what it is. Let's know each other a bit before we go straight into the nitty gritty, if you like. And I don't know. That's certainly something I've changed. I don't know. Yeah, I'm kind of, and this is me as well. I'll be in a I'll be in a session, and I feel like I'm going off track, and I don't know if I'm going off track. And I'm guessing the client will tell me. Look, what Eve was saying, if you're asking solution focused question and the client keeps going to the problem, they're not ready to move forward.
Right.
And I think that's the beauty of when you're connected, you know when it's time to move forward and when it's not. Steve, help me out, brother.
Yeah, what do you think, Steve? Tell us.
Steve, you have all those books behind you there, so draw upon the wisdom. I love it. It's beautiful backdrop there.
Yeah, which is your favorite book, Steve?
Go with it, Steve. Just go with it.
That's such a difficult question. I think probably there is no favorite book, but there are dozens of extracts from books that are my favorites. And I was just thinking about your experience with that therapist. This is relevant because Frank Thomas's book on supervision is one of my favorites. And he actually, right at the beginning of the book, tells the story of a therapist going for supervision, having had a psychodynamic or some other modality supervisor previously. And what I remember about that story, and this is relevant to the Therapeutic Alliance, because I have something to say about that in a moment. But Frank looked at this guy walking in with a big bunch of files and just told him to put them to one side. And they sat down and they did exactly what you were talking about, Joe. This idea of just getting to know each other. But before they started the conversation, Frank asked him what his best hopes were for the supervision session. And the supervisor said, I want to go out feeling taller than when I came in. And Frank actually put him against the doorpost and measured him.
Love it.
And at the end of the session, and they hadn't talked about this big pile of notes and all the rest of it, it became very apparent that the previous supervisor had only ever provided criticism. And the result was that the person went out feeling smaller than when they came in. And Catherine's story just resonated so powerfully with this. And so many people that I see that have been to other therapists that feel smaller when they come out because they've got more problems than when they came in. And by the way, Frank put him up against the doorpost on his way out, and he was about half an inch taller. So,
brilliant.
I think that's just left the files behind, but there we go. I actually have a very different view of I know what you're saying, Gil, about the common factors and all the rest of it. But I actually critiqued that paper. I'm just trying to remember the author who's done huge amounts of work.
Bruce Wampold.
Yeah, I critiqued that and I savaged it because I felt that I came right back to something that Steve DeShazer said very, very long time ago. He said that in the first few minutes is the make or break for that relationship. And if you make it, it's then up to the therapist not to break it. And I've never forgotten that. And the thing is that I get what you're saying, but there was something else that I'm sure it was Eve that said it. It's this thing about active listening. It's really listening to what the person's saying. And I see that as being the common factors to me are not really significant, because if you actively listen, the person is going to engage with you. If you really notice what they're saying, then they are going to engage, and then all the common factors will fall into place. But if you don't listen, it doesn't matter how hard you work, you're still not going to create an engagement. And one of the other things that really annoys me, and it really happens a lot in some of the other therapies, not so much in SF, because we assume that we are person-centered. We assume because of the way we listen, we assume because of the questions that we are going to have a therapeutic alliance. And far fewer people ever drop out simply because we are listening to what they're saying. But if you don't do that, it doesn't matter how hard you work, how good a technician you are, you're not going to build that engagement. And this idea that we as therapists can do anything about that, because at the end of the day, it's the decision of the other person. They decide whether they want to stay, not us.
Yeah.
Well, one poll in some of other research of one poll, he says that it's really the person of the therapist, regardless of therapeutic approach. He says therapists can be equally trained in the same approach, but some are better than others, regardless. Why is that? And I think you're getting it, Steve. Some are just they listen. They're good at connecting.
Yeah. And
Catherine. Sorry, go
on. It's all right, Joe. Carry on.
No, I was just going to say, when I listened back to Eve's conversation, and it was only 2 days ago, one of the things that she said, if you were training people for the first time in this approach, the one thing she said was clarify, clarify, clarify. And she said it 3 times. And it was like, basically, check in with your client that you've actually understood them. And going back to what you're saying, Steve, feeling that you've been heard or understood is about that clarification, and not being afraid to say, actually, I'm not quite sure what you meant. Did you mean this or did you mean that? And that was Eve's take on that, was just clarify it with your client. Don't be afraid to say, just let me be clear on what you've just said. And that, I think, for me, if I had a practitioner like that, I said, can you please clarify what you've just said? I'm either going to think you're an idiot, or I'm going to think, all right, let me say it again, because it depends on how I put that question. I want to make sure that I've fully understood your position. And when you do that, I guess the person on the receiving end feels listened to. Do you know what I mean? And that's what stood out for me in that interview. What about you, Catherine? That listening is immense, or feeling that you've been listened to.
Definitely. I think I think it's a sort of an important question, and it's one that I have sort of wrestled with. The sort of the amount that you use, solution-focused techniques, if you like, for want of a better kind of phrase, in a session. Do you dive straight in? What are your best hopes? Blah blah blah. Or is it important to spend some time talking with people first? I think it's a really interesting question, and my one kind of answer to that question, and I think there may be a number of answers. One answer I have is that what do we like as human beings? What makes us feel valued in our interactions with other people? It's when they ask us questions about us. What could be more validating and endorsing than somebody else's interest in you and the things that you like and the things that you're good at? So I don't know. I've sort of experimented with having a little bit at the beginning where we talk about, you know, their lives and, you know, their partners and all that kind of thing. It always feels a little bit like box ticking to me. And I think I'm back at the point where I'm thinking it's the sensitive asking of those questions that acknowledges the person's response. So I think that's the really important thing, is not to kind of grab at any solution focused tool, you know, that you can sort of desperately grab onto, but to really kind of think, okay, this person has just said that. What's the kind of the easiest, most natural kind of way of following up on that? And again, it's like a social skill. And I think this is all tied up with social skills. So yeah, there's a verbal element, but there's that, are you someone with emotional intelligence? And it's just dawning on me as I speak how important I think that will be in using this using, you know, this approach. Emotional intelligence. Because otherwise you can just do it a bit kind of insensitively, can't you? Yes, Steve, go on, interrupt me for God's sake.
Yeah. No.
I have a technique. Well, it's not a technique. It's just the way I am. I have a 25-yard walk from my clients to my office. And I'm very lucky that I'm in a modern glass-built building. We've got a big wide atrium with huge stairs. And basically, as I walk up with the client, I'm watching them carefully. And I always say the same thing for the first time, which is, welcome to my world. Okay. And I just acknowledging that they're a stranger in my world. And then as we're walking along the corridor, whatever response I get from that tends to determine what happens in the room. Because sometimes they'll be very quiet. Sometimes they'll start talking about how lovely the building is, you know, what lovely, nice setting it is and all the rest of it. And we'll have a little conversation about that. And by the time we've got into my office, I've got a pretty shrewd idea of where I need to start. And it's not even part of the therapeutic process. So we'll get in and I'll invite them to sit down, and they'll sit down, and I'll come and sit down, and I'll fumble about a bit and look a bit bumbly so that they see that I'm not kind of all efficient and all the rest of it. And then I'll sit there and I'll think, now, would it be better if I asked something about their family, or are they being businesslike? And should I ask, now, supposing that you decided to work with me and we did some work together, what would you notice about yourself at the end of that work? What would be different if we had a successful interaction? And then I can be straight. Or sometimes it's just about, you know, are there things that you want to ask about me? All of those questions, they're ready to be asked when I get into the room. And it's all dependent on that first 30 seconds.
Yeah.
There's some research in social psychology and communications research that says that just in social interactions, we make up our minds about people in the first 30 to 90 seconds. And then we spend the rest of the time asking questions to confirm our initial impression.
Right. Yeah.
And I'd like to follow up, Catherine, on that sort of thing. You said you worked as a journalist and also did some storytelling. And so I'm wondering how those who have influenced you as a solution-focused learner and teacher and therapist. I mean, it seems like in journalism, of course, I guess there's different ways of doing journalism, but one common theme is you're trying to get the story and then to write it up to tell the story. So I'm just wondering how those experiences and skill sets, you could kind of build on those as a solution-focused person.
Thank you so much for your question, Gil. It's a lovely question. I think there is a story that we have in a dialogue with a client. It's their story, and as they answer our questions, they're sharing with us that story. And I do think that the point that you're kind of you're kind of pointing at there is a really interesting one, because again it raises this issue of how we attempt to follow the client, listening to their story, and then our story, and in the same way as I think Joe said earlier, our language. The way that we follow the client, it needs to be sensitive, and the transitions from what their story is to our input into the story, if you like, it needs to be seamless. I don't know if any of you have come across that game where you build a story by going around a circle where one person adds a word at a time. So it's a bit like that. The therapist is kind of going, oh, okay, so what about, if this happened? Or what about when you did that? Or what about if you were doing that again? So I think there is an interesting kind of link there with storytelling.
Yeah.
But one place where I really noticed storytelling most strongly and its power, because it has a massive power. I always loved it when I was storytelling, when you say to people, once upon a time, everyone goes, oh, wow, what's it going to be? And the time when I get that storytelling magic is in the miracle question.
Yeah.
And I also have found it in the wise old self kind of technique. So for me, when I'm using the miracle question, I really do use techniques, story building techniques of changing the voice, changing the speed, adding layers. You go home, everything seems normal, you don't know anything's changed, you go to sleep.
You're putting me into a trance.
I know. And then in the middle of the night, when you don't even know it, something amazing happens. And I obviously this is not a performance, but I see my clients go, oh, and they say, and you wake up. What's the first thing you notice? And they go, oh. And that power to move the mind away from the problem, and that imaginative leap, and the way in which I think that the therapist can allow that imaginative leap by just building a little story platform. And I've also found, because in my list of questions I had, what is your favorite technique? So the other technique that maybe not everyone uses so much or is so aware of is that thing about the wise old self, which is Yvonne Dolan, isn't it? Do you know it? Maybe not. So I think John Hendon talks about it. I love it. But when people sometimes, a client is sitting there and they're talking, they're going back to the problem, and I can hear the voice go up, 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 and the problem starts crushing them in front of me, and I kind of see it and I think, okay, we need to get out of here. We need to get out of this moment with this poor person. Okay, this is really bad what you're going through at the moment. So this is the wise old self. So what I want you to, let's pull back. Let's just pull back for a moment and imagine a time in the future when all this is gone. Dealt. So it's just like the miracle question, really, but you're putting it right in the future. And there you are in the future. You sorted this problem. You've come through it. You lived a great life. You did everything you wanted to. You hung out with the people you wanted to. You went to the places you wanted to go. You did the things you wanted to do. Fantastic. And you're looking back and you see yourself back there in the problem, in the middle of this awful problem. What advice would you give to yourself?
When I do the miracle question with a family, it's such a beautiful thing to behold, because you don't have to imagine what X might think or Y might think, because they're in the room. So if you were to wake up tomorrow and things were calm, what difference would it make? What would you notice? And if you notice that, and then turn to the young person. So if your mum was calmer and talking to you in a more calm way, what difference would it make to you? And there's this lovely tango. And like you say, Catherine, it's that tiny little moments where, rather than going through each individual's miracle question and forgetting everyone, if they're in the room, ask them, because they're part of it. So what would you, so if your mum reacted in this way, calmer and smiling, what difference would it make to you? How would you react? If you reacted in that way, mum, how would you react to that? It's this beautiful, beautiful dance. And I don't do enough of it, to my shame. I think I should use it more. I think in terms of this approach, I often wonder sometimes when we have, let's say someone comes in and has been labeled with anxiety or feel that they have anxiety, as well as asking, how is anxiety a problem for you? Because you're an individual and it will be different, and it will be different for everyone else. Maybe how does your anxiety benefit you? Because we can often assume that there's a deficit to that, but a lot of people might turn around and say, do you know what, I can actually use my anxiety to get out of social situations that I don't want to be in. And it's actually quite beneficial sometimes. So I'm kind of toying with that now. How is it a problem for you, but also how is it a benefit? And if this benefit list outweighs the problem list, are we just banging our heads against a brick wall because the client isn't ready to move forward because there's too many benefits to having a problem? I don't know. It's just.
Or they can look at alternative ways of gaining those benefits without feeling anxious.
Yeah. But do you know what I mean, Aish? There's
I know what you mean.
Yeah. There are sometimes benefits to. Yeah. I don't really like my uncle, so I'm just going to say I'm feeling a bit anxious today, so I don't have to go. Do you know that? Yeah.
I need to move this on. Sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Gil and then Steve. Any questions for Catherine? Or whoever.
What? I was I was looking at the time, see where we're at in this. Well, Catherine, I should come back to your discovery of solution focus. You went to a training, you said.
Yeah.
And that just opened your eyes and helped you kind of precipitate a beginning of a shift. Where did you go with it next?
That's a very interesting question, Gil. Because I kind of went rogue.
Oh, I'm going in. I can't wait to hear that story.
So what you'll all be aware of is that solution-focused training tends to be a sort of bolt-on for professionals who have come from different types of, professional background, psychologists, psychotherapists, social workers, and they are in the very happy position, these people, of being able to go off and use their solution focused training, well, hopefully sometimes being able to use it as social workers, as mental health nurses, as previously qualified psychotherapists. Well, I got my level 4 solution focused certificate, and I thought, right, well, I want to use this, and I'm going to.
So you just, from the initial training, you just soon after pursued training, more in-depth training in solution focused therapy.
Well, I have done more in-depth training, but basically I set myself up as a therapist, because in the UK you can.
Okay.
So no one was stopping me, and I was kind of fired by a complete belief in the positivity of this approach. And I thought, based on my own experiences, some of them personal, some of them kind of, secondhand from other people I know, I thought, I do not believe that what I'm going to be doing using solution focus is going to be any worse than what is currently being offered out there by trained professionals. So I set up in private practice here in Bath, and I see people. I see a kind of range, kind of people coming of different ages, different kinds of problem, and I have not been disappointed in kind of the flexibility and the power of this approach to help people. And I mean, what would I say about that? Lots of people would be shocked, horrified, psychotherapists especially, who've been through, usually 3 years of training. And one of the things that I think there was one thing that especially kind of inspired me, and that was interviewing a lady. So I try to write kind of journalism about solution focus whenever I get the chance. And I wrote an article for the Nursing Standard, and I interviewed a lot of very interesting people using solution focus, mainly mental health nurses. And there was a lady I got to interview up in Sunderland, somewhere like that. And she works in a mental health crisis team. And her background is as a nurse. And she was telling me how, so she's not a qualified, mental health professional. She moved into what she does, and she's been using solution focus as working on a crisis team, mental health crisis team in the UK for 20 years. And she said that she gets given all the cases that other people feel nervous about handling, because for some inexplicable reason, all her colleagues see the confidence that she feels about the approach she uses, and so they give it to her. And she says that using this approach with people whose mental health situation is absolutely kind of acute, that she, at this point in her career, is still there, still feeling enthusiasm for what she does, while her other non-solution focused colleagues have left the profession.
Wow.
So I look at that and I think, well, if she can do it, I can do it. And so that was my next step, Gil. And I think what would I kind of want in terms of development now? I think what would be really, really great for the solution focused community is to have a massive kind of library of videos of people doing this approach.
Mhm.
That we can all learn from each other, and we could all know more what exactly it is that we're all doing. You know, what different shapes is the solution-focused approach actually taking in different people's, you know, offices and practice rooms, and how can we learn from what we're all doing in our own different ways, and where are we going? And then kind of the next big question is, well, it is about measuring what we do. How do we define what it is that we're doing? And then how can we measure it? And then having measured it, how can we communicate that message more so that solution focus is not relegated, as it still is, to the margins? Steve, I think you will have some strong feelings on that.
Steve.
I'm going to keep my views to myself. This is about you, Catherine, but I have a question, and I rabbited on a bit earlier. But I have a question for you, which is directly related. I thought you were going to steal my shoot my fox for me, actually, because you've alluded to the question that I actually prepared that I wanted to ask you, and it is very much around supposing that the five of us could step forward in a time machine 5 years, and we were standing there looking back at the last 5 years of solution-focused practice. What would we notice that would tell us that we had moved forward? What do you think the development would be that would take us in the direction we want to go as a community? You've named one with the library. I just wondered if there was...
I think that we would... I think we would have a professional body that was clearly energized and active in you know, putting the case for the solution focused approach. And I think that we have what I would like to see, and I think would be a sign of progress, would be, and you may have views about this, Steve, I have a feeling that somehow we need to be building relationships with the kind of the establishment, if you like, the established approaches. And I don't know what the history is to date of how we have interacted with those, you know, with those bodies. But I feel that somehow we need to integrate more. We need to find the ways to integrate more. And I suppose, I think we would have more time, you know, solution-focused practitioners, to be working together to make that integration happen. I think that I don't think this is all about evidence, because I've talked about evidence with Johnny Kim, and he was saying, well, the trouble with evidence is it takes so long. We can't wait for, you know, 10 years for evidence. I think I feel that we need to get out there more and be talking more to people in the establishment to change views. And it may be that those efforts have already been made, in which case my kind of thought would be, okay, how can we build on that? How do we sustain that momentum? Because otherwise we're just, we need to become, you know, solution-focused practitioners. Yeah. Those solution-focused. So I don't know sorry.
Yeah, go on.
So I don't know, Bill, how it's working in the States. You know, what kind of recognition you have there, how that's been working. What can we learn from what's going on from what's happened in the States?
Well, in the States, evidence-based practice is sort of the king, and for the most part, that tends to be equated with cognitive behavioral therapy or variations of it. For the most part. But one thing I'm noticing in the literature, and I've been saying this for years, is I think eventually cognitive behavioral therapy, and I'm seeing it more and more, is starting to integrate pull in more emphasis on strengths and things that would be consistent with a solution-focused approach. A first cousin of ours is narrative therapy, which focuses on strengths. And I see CBT doing that a little bit more and more. I've been saying for years, and why are they doing that? Because it works. Being strength-based and solution-focused works better, and I'm starting to see a little more research supporting that. Something I've been saying for years is that eventually CBT is just really going to embrace or integrate a lot of what we already do in solution focus, but they're going to claim it's unique to CBT and claim that they created it. But it's still going to be evidence-based, but there's still a lot of widespread use of solution-focused therapy. I am retired professor in social work from Ohio State University, so I've been teaching it for years. And what I'm seeing is in social work programs, it's at least universally being introduced to students. Some emphasize it more than others, but along with the evidence-based approaches as well.
And I'm this is something that me and I struggle with in terms of just the word therapy, to be honest with you. As soon as you use that word therapy, you're in the medical world. You're in that world where it needs to be evidence-based, and drugs are administered and everything else. And I rather see myself as a coach than a therapist. And I think there's a massive difference there. And I think we can keep, for me, in 5 years' time, the most important thing would be, what did my clients get from it? I don't really care what the medical world thinks or what the academic world thinks. What would my clients say that they got out of it? So that's my first and foremost hope for the future, that that I develop as a practitioner. And you were talking about looking at tapes. It sounds like microanalysis is that kind of thing. It's looking at language and the language that we use in conversation. But then I don't even know if I want to go that deep, because whoever comes into the room, I don't know them. So one question that works with one person isn't going to work with this one. So how do I get to know people? Tell me what you do for fun. What brings you joy? Let's start, because when you start a conversation like that, I think it opens up. It's almost like that, the warm up before you go on to a sprint. It's like, let's do this warm up. Let's get the muscles warm, because we've got the conversation flowing. So if these meetings were useful to you, what would be different, rather than going straight in with that? So I think we will, unless we go into that medical model, assessing everything we do from that medical kind of way of doing things, we are going to lose that thing that I love so much about this approach, that every client is unique. You can't fit people into a program. You can't fit people into a diagnosis. They are still themselves. And that's the main difficulty that we have. So if we can overcome that, that would be great. But for me, do my clients leave the office feeling more hopeful than when they came in? Then I've started to do a good job, and I continue to build on that.
Go on,
Sorry.
That's okay. Can I answer a couple of questions? First of all, the UKSFP, the United Kingdom Association, is actually in negotiation with the Public Standards Authority about exactly those kind of things. So that is ongoing in this country at the present time. Myself and Susie Curtis are both in those discussions, so that's ongoing. But to me, solution-focused practice, and Joe got it right. He used the word conversations, because we have another big problem in this country at the moment, is that the existing kind of governors of psychotherapy are trying to get the name psychotherapy or psychotherapist as a regulated profession. And every time somebody starts to talk about this, I tell a little anecdote. And I tell them, okay, so you're a therapist, you go to the pub and you sit and you have a conversation with somebody. And you apply some CBT techniques or maybe some narrative therapy techniques. And that person goes away, discovers you were a therapist, and they decide to sue you. And they will tell me, well, that wasn't a therapeutic conversation. So I say, okay, so can you define the point at which a therapeutic intervention ends and a normal conversation begins? And that is one of the big paradoxes that solution-focused practice solves, because we don't differentiate. We don't have a technical intervention. If I have a conversation in a pub with somebody, and I use a solution-focused question, it's because I think it might be relevant, but we know it does no harm. And that's the wonderful thing about this approach. But we've now retitled ourselves from the Psychological Therapies Unit to the Working Conversations Group, simply because we want to get away from the word therapy. And we're actually doing that as a legal entity, not just rebranding ourselves, because we want to now use a solution-focused constitution in the organisation.
Also, can I just say on the subject of evidence that because I've been very interested in this whole issue of evidence base, and I had a chat with Johnny Kim, who for those who don't know is based in the States and is very interested in, Gil, you might have more detail on this. Evidence.
I know Johnny a little bit. Yeah.
So very interested. He's an academic and he's kind of really focusing on solution focus. He's teaching solution focus to students, and he's done some really good research. Yeah,
and meta-analysis.
So he clarified for me, because I'd always felt a bit on the back foot about evidence, and he said, you absolutely, as a solution focused professional, should not feel disadvantaged by lack of evidence. The size of the amount of evidence is smaller than has been conducted, for example, in relation to CBT. But what it shows is that the approach is as effective. And you can say that to anyone from any discipline who challenges, the evidence base of solution focus. It's the evidence base shows it is as effective as other therapies. And that's a very important thing, I think, for solution-focused practitioners to know.
There's something really important here, because I'm sorry, I was just reading Emma Burns' comment. There's something really important here, because evidence is cherry-picked constantly. And solution-focused practice, you're absolutely right. It's as effective as everybody else, but it's quicker and there's less burnout amongst therapists. And those are three pieces of evidence that are very clear. But when it comes to CBT, they're very poor at actually putting out all the evidence that shows it doesn't work. And I mean, we have a huge study that's gone on in this country now for 12 years called Improving Access to Psychological Therapies, they've never managed, out of the 1.3 million people per year that are referred to the service, they've never managed to get better than a 16% success rate.
Wow.
16%.
Yeah, well, the thing is, the vast majority of people from the 1.3 million drop out from the first session, as Catherine pointed out, she did. Not that that was an IAP service, but then what they do then is they exclude anybody who doesn't complete sufficient. So one isn't sufficient. They have to complete at least 2 sessions, and they have to have a reasonable amount of difference on the 2 scales that they use, which are the GAD-7 and the PHQ-9, in order to be able to say that they've got a measurable difference. And only about 16% of the people actually achieve that goal. But what they do is they exclude everybody who doesn't get to that who doesn't complete that second session, which is almost 50% of the people that they see. So they only then measure the success of the 50 people, the 50% who've done more than 2 sessions.
Jesus.
Well, what's been happening in for a number of years now in psychotherapy outcome studies? I mean, like for many years, the research in CBT in the analysis did not include people who dropped out prematurely. But what's sort of standard practice nowadays is intent to treat analysis, which for those that drop out, the assumption is if somebody had stayed in the treatment, they would not have gotten any worse than what they scored on pretest instruments. So they take the pretest, what they filled out in pretest or first session, and then treat that as if it's the what they scored on the last session, and on follow-up. So that's the intent to treat analysis. So when you do that for different treatment conditions that are being compared to each other, CBT is no better than any other. And
Exactly.
there is the research tends to show there's a higher dropout rate in CBT conditions.
And what's just amazed me is that figure of 16%, and in any other field of operation or work, a success rate of 16% or whatever, you'd be out of business, right? You would be completely sort of folded. That was it. That would be goodbye. And this is why I'm a very simple man. Does my client feel that this is useful? And there is this thing about, the research. I get it. I understand that there's a need for this research, but from a very young age, I've always been a people watcher. Do you know what I mean, guys? I've never been center of attention. I just love to watch people, and I love to see how they interact with each other. And I don't know if that's something I've gained over the years, but when the family walk into the room, I get a feeling straight away that certain questions are not going to work. And I don't know how you can train that shit. Do you know what I mean?
Well, what I want for you, Joe, want for you and for all the people like you, like us, is what I want is that we can continue to do that work.
Oh, Catherine, I will continue to do it, whether the research is for or against it, as long as the client benefits in some way.
And I would like to make sure that we can continue to do that work, because Steve is, making a kind of, a point about the professional standards authority and what approaches that are recognised, approaches that aren't recognised. And it's very important that solution focus is included in up there as a recognised approach. One that gets, wins funding that's recognised. So yeah, I think that is something we definitely need to keep thinking about, keep talking about, I'm in.
I
that.
I love these chats. I really do. Thank you, Catherine, because this has
Oh,
been because generally it's more about you've made this such a wonderful open experience, because I think the four of us have kind of, I don't think I've ever said so much in a conversation. I normally just ask the questions
I
and sit back and
noticed.
I
Yeah.
thank you, Catherine, because
Oh,
it's something that me and Aisha have been struggling with in terms of therapy, coaching, blah blah blah. But anyway, we
Mhm.
won't go back over that again. So yeah,
yeah,
thank you so much. I
well, thank
really,
you guys.
really,
I mean, where would
Steve,
I be without you?
Gil,
Catherine, do you
we,
have a YouTube channel?
No, I don't. No, why?
I want to
Yeah,
encourage you. I want to encourage you to create your own YouTube channel.
Hmm,
I loved your brief demonstration of the miracle question.
right.
I loved it. I'd
Oh,
like to for you to produce have it available on, do a demonstration of that and
mm,
put it up on YouTube.
well, Gil, I would be really interested to hear your kind of any thoughts that you would have about that, because about how you would see a YouTube channel working. That sounds like a really interesting idea. I definitely think that videos is something I'd like to be doing more of. I think it would benefit us all.
mm,
Yeah,
mm.
I agree.
Yeah.
Joe and I we're gonna do a movie night anytime in
Yes,
the future.
please.
We'll have to invite
Catherine.
Catherine
Yeah,
and
yeah,
Steve.
definitely. What, we'll have to do it before Christmas though, guys.
They're exclusive, Gil. I don't know if they're
Yeah, I don't
worthy.
know if Catherine's. Yeah, I don't know if we can invite her.
I
Girl.
don't know, Gil. I don't know. I'll have to think about it. No, they're brilliant. I will certainly invite them. But we have come to the end of FBS Chat. Catherine, I feel like you need to come back on again. Definitely. And I just want to say a huge thank you to Catherine, who also supports with family-based solutions clients and with family-based solutions parent workshops, who is an incredible partner to have in the workshops with me. And her wisdom, her knowledge, her passion, her experience, absolutely everything creates such a beautiful atmosphere. And I can't imagine delivering the Wednesday groups without my dear friend Catherine there. She's
Aisha, wow.
beautiful.
I look forward to more. It's been such a joy to meet you all. What fun this has been. Wow. Thank you.
Been lots of fun.
Any
Yeah.
last words, Steve?
Last word. I bet Shakespeare would have loved solution-focused practice and
Oh, I
video.
love it.
Undoubtedly.
Oh,
Yeah.
brilliant.
This is for another conversation, but you're a trained actor, did Shakespeare. I just want to know how actors memorize their lines, but that's another conversation.
Yeah, I'm interested in that.
Yeah.
I will say very, very briefly that I think most people underestimate their own ability to remember things. In the olden days, people used to learn long poems. That was what people did. We just got out of habit. People can do that.
Yeah.
You
But
can
we
do
just
that.
Google everything now, don't we? So we're not as creative.
So, Gil, we need a movie night.
Well, let's end this and we can schedule.
I will leave that to quite funnily, one of my clients thinks Aisha's my receptionist, and I haven't put him straight, guys. Yes, she's my receptionist. She will let you in. It is
Bless him.
so I will pass that on to my receptionist, Gil.
Joe did. I don't think you saw Aisha's facial expression when you said, "I'm just a simple man."
Yeah, I am. I'm a very simple man, and I don't
We
deny
hear
it.
that in nearly every FBS
Yeah,
chat,
but I
guys. If
am.
we were to go back and
Go back and watch the video.
Don't
Lord.
overthink it,
I'm
guys.
just a simple man.
Yeah,
That's
whatever.
what you hear. So
Guys.
next week we have a FBS Chat Christmas special. Ooh, I can hear you all thinking and saying, ooh, who's going to be on? I don't know. What are we going to talk about? I don't know. Who knows? Let's just see what happens. Why not? So thank you very much to Catherine, to Gil, to Steve for just being yourselves. Can you guys just stay behind for a couple of minutes to say a quick goodbye? And to everybody else, we will see you next week.
Bye.
Bye.